This is the agenda that we have. Basically, we're going to go over self-introductions and housing element content. Look at an example of the congregational land overlay in Pasadena at one site, and then open it up for discussion and talk about a little bit about next steps. But essentially, the purpose of the meeting is basically to introduce this as a discussion item. And this is coming at the request of the City Council regarding a housing concept that creates an affordable housing overlay zone on congregation lands. And what that would do is it would allow church lands to be used as an ancillary use by right on parking lots or vacant parcels of church properties in the city of Sierra Madre. So with that, why don't we go ahead and stop sharing this, and if we could go ahead and introduce ourselves. I'm Vincent Gonzalez. I'm the Director of Planning and Community Preservation for the city of Sierra Madre. And I'm going to have Claire, if you can introduce yourself. You're currently on mute.
Hello, I'm Claire. I'm the Associate Planner for City of Sierra Madre.
And Claire is the point person also for the housing element, working closely with our consultant. And Karen, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Karen Warner with Karen Warner Associates. I'm the housing element consultant to the city. I've worked with Sierra Madre on their past 3 housing elements. So very familiar with the challenges that they face and really excited about this opportunity for housing on church lands.
And Trish, if you can introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Trisha Keene. I am a volunteer with the Congregational Land Committee with Making Housing and Community Happen. I used to be on the Planning Commission for the City of Pasadena and the Design Commission as well, actually on the Rose Bowl Operating Company Board of Directors currently. And by day, I work for the Housing and Community Investment Department for the City of Los Angeles.
Okay. Dr. Shook.
I'm the Executive Director of Making Housing and Community Happen. And so during our presentation, we'll be sharing a little bit about what we're doing.
And Bert Newton.
Yes, I'm the Liaison and Outreach Coordinator for Making Housing and Community Happen.
And if we can go to our participants, Reverend Snapcullis.
Yes, I'm a pastor at the United Methodist Church in town, just arrived in July in the middle of COVID, and very interested to hear from all of you. And of course, the church has been very committed to these types of issues in the community. So,
and Dr. Michael Cunningham.
Yes, Michael Cunningham. I am the Retreat Center Director at Mata de la Rosa on the sunny side.
And Father Bramberger.
Hi, I'm Michael Bamberger. I'm the rector at the Episcopal Church of the Ascension here. Been around town for 35 years or so, so I've been a part of some of the housing initiatives both here in Sierra Madre as well as in Jill, it's been a long time since I've seen you, but I used to be the president of ECPAC, and for sure.
I remember that. Yeah, it's been a long time. You look great.
I'm close to retirement.
All right.
it's a goal.
So, Karen, did you want to move on to our next component of the agenda?
Sure.
Housing element context and RENA requirements.
Do you want me to share the screen? Does it matter since you're recording?
Let's see. What did you want to bring up your PowerPoint presentation? I can go ahead and do that.
You want to do that? I mean, I don't know if it matters since you're recording.
Yeah, let me And let me get into the PowerPoint again.
There we go. Thank you. Maybe you can go to the next slide. Yeah. Whoop. Nope. Next. That one. Okay, great. I just wanted to start out with a little context in terms of the housing element and, you know, what kind of inspired this approach. And then talk about what the city's done thus far in looking at site opportunities within the churches in town. Talk a little bit about the concept of the affordable housing overlay and some new legislation that was signed into law that makes housing on church sites easier. And then just to share a couple really recent examples that were just approved by city councils last week in Orange County. So first slide. Vincent, can you forward the slide? Thank you. Okay, the housing element, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with this, although Sharon, I don't know if you're from out of state, you might not be. It's a mandated part of every city's and county general plan. And it mandates that local governments adequately plan to meet existing and projected housing needs of all economic segments of the community. And the housing element is updated every 8 years. So the current element is 2014 to 2021. The one that we're working on now will go from 2021 to 2029. The element is comprised of 5 major components. A review of accomplishments under the existing element. So you figure out what you're doing right and what you need to modify moving forward. There's a very in-depth housing needs assessment, evaluating what the community's existing and projected housing needs are. There's an evaluation of any constraints to housing. So we look at all the city's zoning and the city's fees and the city's processing procedures and identify if any of those are constraints. And then if they are, we need to have a program response to address. There's the identification of sites, which is a big part of the element. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit in greater detail in a minute. And then there's an 8-year program strategy. And then the city is required to report annually on its progress in implementing its housing element. The element is required to be reviewed by the State Department of Housing and Community Development, otherwise known as HCD, for statutory compliance. And there are a lot of repercussions if an element is not found in compliance by the state. About 20% are out of compliance statewide now. It limits your access to state funds for housing. It opens up cities to litigation for having an inadequate general plan. So there's all kinds of reasons why it's important to get the state's approval of the element. Next slide. And this is just an overview of, you know, Sierra Madre is a relatively affluent community, but there's actually a lot of renters and there's a lot of lower income population and a lot of seniors in Sierra Madre that are in need of affordable housing. So who needs affordable housing in the community? People who work here and can't afford to live here, such as teachers and retail workers. Special needs populations, such as senior citizens, persons with disabilities, and children of longtime Sierra Madre residents that, you know, would like to move back to the town that they grew up in, but they don't have, you know, housing options. Next slide. So I mentioned the housing sites inventory is a key part of the housing element update. And this is all triggered by what's called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, or RHNA. And the RHNA are household growth numbers that are generated at the state, and then they're allocated to the regional planning agency, which in this area is SCAG, the Southern California Association of Governments. And then SCAG distributes these household growth figures to all the member well, not just member, all 191 cities and 6 counties in the SCAG region. And so then the RHNA number represents what the city needs to plan for in its housing element through zoning to accommodate that amount of growth. The city's RHNA for its current housing element was for a total of 55 units. So the map here, which I'm not expecting you to actually read, but it shows the housing sites. There were 6 key housing sites the city identified to address its regional housing needs. Next slide. So the draft RHNA for this upcoming cycle, you can see in the 3rd column, has increased from 55 units to 204 units. And the reason the increase is so dramatic is the whole SCAG region had a 3-fold increase because of the statewide underproduction of housing and the affordable housing crisis. So the state is saying, okay, jurisdictions, you really need to up your production because we're really in a crisis now. So this table shows how the RHNA works, essentially. It's divided into 4 income categories. And the income thresholds I show there are for a household of 3. And the way we show that we have sites to accommodate this RHNA is based on what's called default densities. So in housing element statutes, a smaller community like Sierra Madre has a default density of a minimum 20 units an acre, which the state statutes indicate is the minimum density on which an affordable housing project could be built. Now, if a market rate project is built at 20 units an acre, it won't be affordable to very low or low income. So this does require subsidy, but in terms of the city's zoning powers, it is required to designate enough sites at the 20 unit an acre density to accommodate the very low and low income numbers. And for moderate income, there's a density of 12 units an acre. Next slide. So we've been working hard, and staff has been working very diligently in evaluating potential sites to address the RHNA thresholds. We've met with council on three different occasions to get further direction from them on potential sites to address this need. The city doesn't have flat vacant land to accommodate this growth. So mostly what we're looking at is recycling of existing uses. The housing element statutes have gotten a lot stricter in terms of what we can count. So for example, site 4, which is on Suffolk, there's existing older homes there. We need to be able to show that there's a likelihood that those would intensify during the 8-year planning period. It's very hard to do. Fortunately, there is a project moving forward on a couple of those parcels that's doing just that. But so this is what we've identified thus far, and we're going to be taking this out to the community. Just December 1st is our first community meeting to get input on this. The other piece that helps Sierra Madre in addressing its affordable needs is accessory dwelling units. So those can go anywhere in residential zones. So they aren't shown on here, but they will help the city address its affordable needs. Next slide. So in looking at all of those sites, and at the, and currently I should say the city's maximum R3 zone is just, I think it's 16 units an acre, correct, Vincent? And then they have one property that's designated at 20 units an acre, which they did for the last housing element to meet that RHNA. So now we would have, oops, not yet. You're going a little fast here. Something's happening.
The problem, I wanted to hit on mute, and usually I use the space bar, but the space bar also advances the slides.
Technology.
So
Okay, there we are.
yeah, in the R3 zones, we're currently at 13 units per acre.
13, right.
And except for the sites that were identified for affordable
Yeah.
sites.
So designating all 6 of these sites at 20 units an acre is a significant bump for the city. Designating them at 30 units an acre is what we would need to do to meet the RHNA. So it's really a stretch. And as you're probably aware, the city has the Measure V boundary around the greater downtown that requires a vote of the people for anything that is going to be zoned at greater than 13 units an acre. So 3 of those sites would require a Measure V vote. Next slide. So we got kind of excited when SB 899 by Senator Wiener looked like it was going to pass, which would have allowed affordable housing as a use by right on land owned by a religious institution. And it passed the Senate. It was just about ready to go. And then it, like many bills, were pulled because the priority was on bills that were going to address the COVID. I fully expect this bill to come back next legislative cycle, but that's what got us initially looking at the church sites in Sierra Madre. We have been discussing this with the council, the concept of an overlay, which doesn't mean it's mandatory that affordable housing be built on the sites. It's just that it would allow it by right. And if the city does go forward with this, then we would have an ordinance that specifies, what the affordability would need to be, what the density parameters would be. So it would set up the development standards for housing on church sites. Staff has looked at, not yet, staff has looked at all the church sites in the city and identified 7 that have enough land either through parking or other undeveloped areas that might be suitable for housing. And we generally looked at if that parking or undeveloped area were built with housing, there's potential for about 200 units, which would be a very significant increase to the city's sites inventory. Next slide. Okay, so one bill that did pass that makes it easier to build housing on church sites is known as the YIGB bill, Yes in God's Backyard, AB 1851. And it allows for a 50% reduction in the existing parking spaces on church sites to accommodate affordable housing. Because parking a lot of times is what makes building housing not pencil. So if we reduce the parking requirements, it makes the development of housing much more viable. It allows the number of church parking spaces available after completion of an affordable housing project to count towards the housing project's parking requirements. It does establish a standard of a minimum of 1 parking space for affordable housing, except if you're within half a mile of public transit, then you can have 0 parking. Next slide. And I'm working with RRM, a design firm, on a couple different housing elements, and they happen to be involved with a nonprofit, National Core, that is doing affordable housing on church sites. And these are two projects that were just approved last week in Orange County that are kind of exciting. So this is St. Joseph's Episcopal Church in Buena Park. And you can see that they divided the church parcel into a north and south lot. And in doing so, they're going to provide 66 low-income senior apartments. They're building a new community center, and they're improving open space. And you can see the schematic on the bottom, how the housing kind of fits in with the church. Next slide. And then the Church of the Blessed Sacrament in Placentia, again, it's about a 3.2 acre parcel, 65 low-income senior apartments. They are adding a total of 45 parking spaces for the 65 apartments. They're building a new parish hall. They're demolishing the prior parish hall and building a new one. One of the benefits is the housing developer can make improvements on, that are beneficial to the church as well. They're making various improvements to the church facilities on the site, and they're adding a community garden. So that's just to kind of give you an example of, some of the, and Jill's very familiar with lots of these projects, but they are happening, so that's good. So with that, Jill, I'm going to turn it over to you and Tricia to talk about what Make Housing Happen does.
Thank you. That was an excellent presentation. That was very powerful. Thank you. And I just wanted Pastor Sharon to know that I go to the First United Methodist in Pasadena with Pastor Sandy. So.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, Sandy and I went to seminary together. Yeah.
Oh, she's amazing.
Yeah, yes.
I just feel really honored and privileged to be invited, and glad that Tricia is with us, who's on our team. And so she and I will be sharing the presentation. We'll have to go quickly because we'll have to probably skip over a number of slides. I just need to get a little idea of the time frame we have today. Are we ending at 11, or do we have a little time beyond that for discussion?
When is amenable, we can continue on past 11 o'clock if that's necessary.
Is that okay with everybody? A little flexibility?
I'm fine.
I have just a little bit of time past 11. I'm kind of,
Okay.
my schedule's always a little gnarly.
Yes, I understand that. I'm going to go ahead. I'm assuming I have permission to share. Yes, thank you. Let me start from the beginning. So just briefly, we've already done introductions, and I'll be sharing a little bit about who we are as an organization and a brief background on our Congregational Land Committee work, and then the process of how we work with churches, and the overlay proposal that Karen was most interested in, what that looks like. And we'll skip some of the aspects of how to get this passed. But earlier, Karen mentioned my book, which came out in 2006 and a revised version in 2012. It's being used on campuses around the country. So we've been doing housing justice institutes as well around the country. It's been exciting. So the name of our nonprofit, we've been doing housing justice for about 25 years, but we became a nonprofit and formalized in 2018. Our goal really is to equip congregations, community leaders, and neighbors with practical tools needed to transform their communities, to end homelessness and stabilize the cost of housing through education, advocacy, advisement, and organizing. So our group, our committee that does the church land, that really is the advisement part of what we do. We have 6 committees, ASHA, Affordable Supportive Housing Advocates. We've just seen another 112 units approved. All told, about 250 units we've seen approved in the last year. year and a half or so. ADUs, we helped shape some state policy as well as local, and it's been very exciting to see that increase. We're trying to streamline the process of making it less onerous to have an ADU, and also looking at some funding sources for affordable ADUs. Safe parking, we're working closely with Foothill Unity Center in Monrovia. We want to see a safe parking program throughout San Gabriel Valley. At this point, there's not one, and it's a great opportunity for churches to bless those who are living in their cars with a path to getting housed. Community Land Trust, we just launched that team a few weeks ago. We would love to have a representative from Sierra Madre to join that effort. It's a beautiful model of affordable homeownership where you own only the home and not the land. Very powerful model. There's a chapter in my book and a lot of resources out there on learning how to do this. So North Fair Oaks Empowerment, that is working geographically. It's more community-based organizing. We've got about 10 churches in that corridor that are all struggling. There's one church, they're all African-American, and then two of those are Latino, but are Latinx is I guess what they say now. But one church only has 8 members left. And so they're looking to put housing on their entire property and moving their church into the community room. There's also a church there that already has 58 units that we're proposing. We have an RFP ready to go, and I'll be talking about that in just a minute. Inclusionary, we put that committee to bed. We've already been able to increase the percentage of set-aside units to 20%. All told, I think it's right about 590 units and counting. Another 78 will be approved this year that were built without a cent, just by requiring that developers set aside a percentage. And then with the fee that folks can pay in lieu of including those units, it's accrued about 26 million in our city's coffers. Well, not the city's coffers, but our Affordable Housing Trust Fund. That's been leveraged to produce about another 488 units, and many of those permanent supportive and home ownership. So let me tell you just briefly about kind of a little bit of our philosophy and approach. You all know the need, it's huge. I won't go over that, but we really see that the homeless, it's not a homeless crisis. We see that it is an affordable housing crisis, that we really, everyone deserves a home. And so the onus is really on making sure communities are hospitable for everyone, no matter their income level. And we really see it as a spiritual and moral crisis. What kind of city do we want? Do we want a city that's welcoming to everyone or exclusive? And so that's a constant balance, I think, in trying to figure out what we really want and matching that up with what does God want? How does he feel about cities? And so it looks at our deep values. And so there's a lot about land and cities in the Bible. It's everywhere. In my book, Bert, who's on the webinar with, or this Zoom with us today, has helped write the chapter. He's truly a scholar, and he's helped write the chapter in our book on a theology of land and housing. It's unpacks from Genesis to Revelation what the Bible says about land use. It's very powerful. But city planning, you could look at the Bible from the lens of city planning. These chapters talk in detail, like it talks about setbacks and heights. It's almost like envisioning God as an architect and a city planner. And when you read these chapters, it's really fascinating. Talks about housing for the priest and all kinds of detail. And so this committee we have started about little over a year ago. We are so excited. Bill Burns, Trish, I think this is where you were going to start, right? And share.
No, Jill, I think you were going to go through the introduction of the committee, and I was going to take over when we do the work.
Okay, thanks for the reminder. Yeah, so Phil Burns is our chair. His firm, the Arroyo Group, is the group that planned Pasadena's old Pasadena area. And then the Civic Center and Playhouse, they've done planning around the country, won lots of awards. We're really thrilled to have him chair our committee. Andre White is amazing. He's Harvard trained affordable housing developer, and just does, he's great working with churches and helping them envision what their dreams are for their space. Hugh Martinez is like a walking encyclopedia of information on affordable housing. He is just amazing, huge asset to our community. Cynthia Kurtz, she attends the United Methodist Church, First United, and she was a former city manager for the city of Pasadena and other cities throughout. And then Reverend John O works with LA Voice, and so he's been a huge benefit in many ways, but helping us through his connections with LA Voice to get funding so that our advisement services we can offer free of charge. He was able to get us a $100,000 grant for our advisors. Then Tricia. So this is a great segue to introduce her. She's already introduced herself briefly, but we are just so grateful to have her part of our team. We were actually praying for a land use lawyer. It was one of our goals, and we feel like in many ways this was just a huge answer to have Tricia join us. So as you can see, lots of years in experience. When she was at the Planning Commission, on that Planning Commission, I would just be jealous. I go, this brain, this amazing woman, I would love to get to know and learn from her. So so Tricia's going to take it from here. Thanks.
Thank you, Jill. And yes, I did get to know Jill when she would come and present to the Planning Commission, and I was always impressed with the dedication and passion that Jill and her group brought. And I had the same thought, like I wanted to get to know this person who was coming before the Planning Commission all the time. And here we have it. Fast forward a bit and I get to work with Jill on this committee. So I am a land use lawyer for about 20 years now. I was in private practice for a while, then I was county counsel for Los Angeles County Regional Planning Department, and then I moved over to the city of LA in 2013 and have had different roles with the city since then, including with the council office, the planning department, and now the housing and community investment department. And I think what's been interesting about all of that work is sort of the understanding of the full range of issues that come together when you're trying to do something like a congregational land overlay zone, because it is politics, it is community relations, it is getting nitty-gritty with the zoning code, and it is understanding the importance of providing and how to provide housing. So I will walk us quickly through the work that we're doing and the approach that we're taking in Pasadena on the congregational land overlay, and then we can obviously have some time for discussion about what we've learned and how that could be helpful for Sierra Madre. So next slide. So why congregational land? I think, and Jill, you can go ahead and pop all the points on the slide. I think this group probably understands why congregational land is important to look at. It's everything from one of the easiest sources of underutilized land because of the way churches have been developed with large parking lots and not necessarily large buildings filling that land. So it's a place to look where we can repurpose land so we can have housing for people rather than focusing on places to put our cars. I think increasingly everyone is noticing that church attendance is declining in a lot of instances, but even for vibrant congregations that have a ton of activity, most days of the week, you're not using most of the land, because it's dedicated to parking. So there's ways to rethink how to use that property. And there's definitely a synergy with using the land for a church, which is a mission-oriented institution for affordable housing that will help to recreate what was occurring naturally, decades ago in many cases, where you had a community that grew up around a church and a church that grew up as a result of the community around it. And we sort of decoupled those as housing costs have gone up or the nature of a neighborhood has changed, but the nature of the congregation hasn't. We've seen in several of our churches in Pasadena where the congregation has remained active in the church, but they can no longer afford to live near it. So they've all moved. And what you have is a disconnect between the neighborhood surrounding the church, the type of housing available, and the people who are worshiping in that space. And so I think the reuse of church land for affordable housing just is a natural progression of a way to fill that gap. And then also a way for cities to meet their affordable housing needs without needing to really fundamentally rethink how the development patterns in the overall city are accomplished. So next slide. I think as we all know, we had a housing crisis before COVID-19. We have a housing crisis during COVID-19, and we're gonna have a bigger housing crisis after we're into the recovery phase of this, because I think everything is kind of on hold and we're gonna see a lot more difficulties as we're all trying to climb out of the situation that we're in. Working for the city of LA, I can tell you we are definitely having a budget crisis that is it's gonna get worse before it gets better. And so I think looking at church land as an opportunity to provide space for affordable housing, because it is one of the areas where you can have a fairly low cost investment for a pretty high return on density that you can get. And then obviously there's that nice connection between local land, the construction jobs that can be supported in the economy, and how bringing affordable housing into a neighborhood actually has a multiplier effect on helping that neighborhood as far as jobs, resources, and economic activity are concerned. Next slide. And
So let me just mention this 20-20-20 rule. This is an affordable housing complex on Orange Grove and North Fair Oaks. And because 20% of all the materials need to be local, 20% of all the labor local, and 20% contracts, this put $6 million into this rather credit-starved community. Now, you don't have anything like this in Pasadena. I don't think density would ever allow anything this high, but there's a lot more going on than just housing. That's very exciting when you look at affordable housing. So, yeah. So take it from there.
Yeah. Thanks, Jill. I think that's a really important point. We're not just building housing, it's building community and all of the things that support the community around jobs and construction and having people have stable places to live. For us right now, with the work that our group is doing, we have over 30 churches in Southern California that are interested. 17 of them are located in Pasadena. And if you look at what would be able to be achieved under the Congregational Land Overlay Zone, the way that we're talking about it, you're talking about over 1,100 units that could be possible with pretty easily accomplished. In addition, it's, as Jill mentioned, it's always a little bit more than housing. There's opportunities for safe parking, and there's opportunities for different housing models, from affordable housing to housing that serves direct needs of the congregation specifically. So next slide. So we've developed a process for working with churches who are potentially interested, because we want to be both a source of information to the community about how this can work, an advocate for making it happen, and then an actual resource for the churches themselves to make sure that they can navigate what is probably an unfamiliar process for most religious organizations. Most are not developers by nature. I mean, most people are not developers by nature. And so bringing together some expertise to help the churches navigate that process in a way that's successful without it being expensive. Anybody who has done development knows if you put together the best development team, it's a really pricey endeavor. So we can just run really quickly through our process, but you can see the steps here. Identifying the congregations that are interested, having the initial meetings to get the information and gain that trust, doing a feasibility study to figure out what could be accomplished on a site under existing rules. And then obviously we're thinking about what could be done under an overlay zone. Going through the church's internal approval process so that there's buy-in from everyone who needs to approve it, but also an ownership from the congregation that this is something that that group wants to make happen. And then going to an RFQ and RFP process so there can actually be a series of proposals coming into the church for that organization to analyze, evaluate, and see what is a good fit for them. And so for that, you know, like we've been working with churches on those steps to help make this possible. I think we all recognize the barriers to affordable housing that are on the next slide. Land cost is obviously a huge one in Southern California, concerns around from the surrounding community and sources of funding. But one that's very specific and very solvable is the zoning on church property. In Pasadena, we don't have any churches that are properly zoned for allowing building affordable housing by right. And so that's why we've been talking about this overlay zone, because that will solve that problem and make housing. We would like to see it made by right. We don't have an overlay zone approved yet, so that is still something that is under discussion. But why is, like, talking a little bit about why we need the overlay zone, I think.
I'm thinking we can probably skip. I think we can skip this slide. Yeah, let's go on to the proposal.
I think we hit on those issues, and I think we can skip through to the slide that talks about what we're actually proposing, because that's just a map of where the churches are. So our proposal talks about getting, so for the next slide, the way we're approaching it in Pasadena, we are looking to have affordable housing allowed by right, because that will be the biggest cost and time saver. If it requires any discretionary process, that ends up adding time and money to the development process. Part of our proposal talks about having at least 50% of the units be affordable. Not having it be 100% affordable was very intentional, because when we've been talking to churches, one of the concerns they had was making sure that if there were members of their congregation that needed housing, if there were other things related to their church operations where it would be helpful to house people on site, they wanted to have the ability to have some units, probably not many units, but some units be available for those specific purposes. And then anybody, again, who's done any kind of affordable housing development knows that there's a benefit to having some market rate units help to subsidize the affordable housing units, because that reduces the amount of public dollars that you need to put into a project to make it feasible. And then obviously the parking requirements that we already talked about earlier that Karen mentioned are critical for making any of this successful. So the church needs flexibility in parking to make this work. So next slide. We can probably skip forward past the income bands, because that's something that you can figure out for your specific needs in your city. But for us, we did look at what our dwelling units per acre minimum densities would be to make projects feasible. So again, that's something that you need to do the site-specific analysis for Sierra Madre, for instance, but for Pasadena, this is what we ended up with for making projects actually be able to, quote unquote, pencil. On the units per acre for non-residential zones, the idea was just making sure, so on the next slide you can see, just making sure that we had enough property that was zoned with enough density so that it would make economies of scale able to happen when you're building on church property. Most affordable housing projects need a minimum density to make it worth a developer's while to even propose that project. So we were thinking for us and the types of lots we have available, that 32 units per acre is the minimum that we would need. But again, it depends on what your available land inventory is to help you determine what your minimum density would be. A couple other things that are important to consider and are very neighborhood or community specific, obviously heights, setbacks, and any of the development standards that would apply to residential development in general, you would need to evaluate for purposes of an overlay zone. But I think something, again, and skipping ahead to the next slide, most development standard issues can be solved by design solutions. You can have a building that meets every single development standard and be imposing and awful, and you can have one that violates every development standard and is so wonderfully designed that people love to have it in their neighborhood. So I think it's a matter of how you carve that out to integrate into the surrounding community to be respectful of the design aesthetic that you're trying to achieve. An example we have is Marv's Place. Good design, fits well in the neighborhood, and is a great example of affordable housing that was built in Pasadena. And I think
This is for 19 homeless families on the corner of Mar Vista and Union. So if you have a chance to drive by, it's just really beautiful.
Yeah, it is a great project. And I think we can skip forward to the slide on administration because we did talk about, there's a typo on this, that's AB 1851. But okay, we did talk about this already. And, you know, obviously other things to consider, and something that may actually be very important to Sierra Madre is the adaptive reuse buildings. So on the next slide, considering how you could reuse existing buildings for this purpose rather than requiring new development is something that could be very valuable in existing communities to maintain character but allow for change in use. And then I think the final point that I will make is, again, hitting on the having it be allowed by right is going to be the most efficient way to get it done, will provide the most certainty for churches and potential developer partners. And then minimizing the amount of changes that need to be made for any of the underlying approvals. Like in Pasadena, most churches require a conditional use permit. We're proposing that you don't need to do anything to modify that use permit unless you're actually making a change to church-related operations. If you're just getting permission to do the affordable housing development on the site and changing the parking requirements, you should be able to leave, you as a church should be able to leave your underlying CUP untouched, because that also helps streamline the process. You would only need to go through a modification to your CUP if you actually needed to make changes to the church buildings or the church operations as a result of this effort. And with that, I will hand it back to Jill to wrap up.
Yeah, I'm just going to quickly mention, it sounds like you're already pretty far down the line compared to Pasadena with looking at a by right proposal, but we do have permission from our city council, just a green light. It's not gone to vote yet, but they basically said that they're giving the green light to the planning staff to create a proposal to bring back to them. And so it's gone once through our housing commission, our planning commission, and then it will go through workshop back to the planning commission, and then finally the city hall. But we're pleased that it was unanimous to look at this. It takes at least 5 votes, and I think right now we're pretty confident with at least 3. Looking at our city, we've been meeting with all the church leaders and the city council reps in each of their districts and doing similar presentations to this, getting feedback. So we've submitted about 100 letters and comments, and 17 churches were involved in that, as well as neighborhoods. And so we're really the church I was mentioning that wants to build those 50+ units on their property. It's a small little church, and they have submitted 32 comments at one little, there was not one opposing comment. So I mentioned the green light we have. So far, we've gotten a number of articles all published about this, trying to make sure the community can really have significant buy-in. This is Pastor Othello at the one church that submitted those 32 comments. And so I'm going to skip this. We've done a lot to get approvals through prayer meetings on sites and all kinds of things. We even had a sleepover, which was amazing. We had 1,000 emails and petition signed in order to get this one passed, or it's the one just south of this, the Heritage Square South. But the workshop is next, and then the Planning Commission, City Council. And so we're mobilizing with very specific ways to help neighbors and church members to engage to make this happen and equipping them. We have a fact sheet, talking points, and it's important people understand myths of density, myths that will help them understand the value of this to bring more eyes and safety into the community. Oftentimes churches are left empty, and we have one church in Altadena we're working with. They have all kinds of crime that's happened on their campus. And so they see the value of bringing more neighbors that will watch out for their building to prevent less crime. So I have a whole thing on kind of a theology of land that I'd love to share if you guys want to invite me to your churches, or in Bert, who does an excellent job with that, who's on our call. So I'm going to stop share and call this done, our presentation. Looks like Andre White joined us. That's exciting. He is the also on our church land committee, so he can answer questions you may have about the affordable housing piece. Tricia can answer questions in terms of the land use piece. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. That was really, really inspiring. Vincent, I would suggest we open it up to the congregations to discuss what their thoughts are.
Right. We wanted to get your input and see what you thought and the viability of these options on your church properties. So if anybody wanted to offer their comments or opinions.
One thing I do want to say is that sometimes in our organizing, asking churches to support the overlay zone, they think we're telling them they have to build on their property. But we need every church to support this, whether they're building or not. And so with the housing element, it's just a planning document. You know, would it be potential? But I don't think this discussion is asking churches necessarily if they are going to do this, but would they support it? Is if I frame that correctly?
Yeah, no, that's
yeah.
exactly right. Yeah.
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 Well,
I mean, I think this is a great presentation, and I'm looking forward to getting with my folks and you know, sharing more and learning more.
So are you at the church?
The corner of Michelinda and Sierra Madre Boulevard.
Oh yeah, I love you. I worked with you guys on Family Promise and a lot of things. It's great. Yeah. So you guys have got an amazing campus. It's just huge. So it could be that some of those buildings could be adapted for this in one area. But that's, you know, that's a pretty dramatic change in thinking about some of that use. So has there been some discussions at all, or is this kind of just the first exposure? Right
No,
now?
this would be a new thing for them. So in terms of what you said about the people communication work required, it would be a very beginning process to have those conversations with them.
Yeah.
Well, and I think something that's very important that we've certainly noted along the way is how much churches and their congregations need to understand it's completely within your control for what makes sense for your campus, for your congregation, and for your mission. You know, there are some churches who've been talking about needing to provide a lot, you know, as much housing as they can with as deep a subsidy as possible because that's what their communities need. And for others, it's a mix. You know, it's what fits for you and what feels right for you because you're completely in the driver's seat.
Yeah, we only go at the pace of the church and on their invitation, totally. So Michael, I know you've been in discussion with Carol Daly, who's on our safe parking committee, and
yes,
and that you're excited about that use, but I haven't followed very carefully. I know that in the past you've looked at some development of land. There's been a lot of pushback. that I'm aware of. What can you bring us up to date in what you're thinking?
Yeah, so we're in a, well, first of all, let me say I think this is a great project, and you know, anything can be done to alleviate the problem of and I think you framed it rightly. It's an affordable housing crisis, not just a homeless crisis, because you know it affects the way that you attack the problem, looking at it that way. Um, so Mater Della Rosa is a little bit different in the sense that we're not a church per se. We are a retreat center servicing a community of churches and parishioners in the LA and surrounding archdiocese. So we have somewhere in the order of about 25, under normal circumstances, somewhere in the order of about 25,000 visitors a year. And during the week, a lot of those visitors are schools and high schoolers that are coming in on retreat. So one of the things, yes, we have a large parking area, but it is, except during the current circumstances, obviously, normally pretty much in use. So we don't have like a lot of vacant land in our what we're calling now our retained parcel. There is a separate development going on right now, which is under MOU with the city and with a developer, New Urban West, for sale of about 20 acres of our property, which is leading up to the retreats, to where the retreat center is currently, off Sunnyside. And that is in the process. That's going through the public review process, and that's for 42 residential homes. So that activity is sort of in process currently. Now, independent of that, let's assume that actually goes forward and is a done deal. We still have a large parcel of land here for our retreat center, but our retreat center, by the nature of our, in quotes, you know, spiritual business, is a quiet location of you know, for reflection and contemplation and the like. So you know, trying to retain that atmosphere is an important element. Having said that, we are in the affordable housing situation ourselves, because we have the tradition here has been that the vowed, that is the ordained priests and monks from the congregation, have in the past provided most of the staffing for the retreat center, and over the course of the last 25, 30 years, that's changed dramatically. And I'm a visual element of that. I'm a lay person, you know, running the retreat center. So we have a requirement for low-cost, affordable housing for our staff, because we're in that same category where people, you know, people working for us in the kitchen, and we're in the hospitality business. They cannot afford to purchase homes, or in many cases certainly rent homes in Sierra Madre. So we are providing housing already for limited number of staff on site, and I can see that trend is going to have to continue as we have an increasingly larger number of lay people working in the ministry here, and the need to provide them with affordable housing. And we have also got interest in other groups, single lay. I apologize using the word lay. That basically, in my terminology, is someone who's not ordained, but people that are not ordained in the church. So they would be in the lay, you know, just the average person, if you like, that wants to participate and live in a community of like-minded people. So we're looking at trying to find ways that we could provide affordable housing for those individuals, as that's a trend that we also see occurring in the future. So the movement, I think, for us to be able to provide affordable housing just to support the retreat center, and for people that want to live on the property, but in a, you know, our current configuration is not set up for doing doing that. We're basically set up for retreats. So so we, you know, there'll be a requirement to either reconfigure what we've got or build additional. So I think that, you know, I support the initiative. You know, fully in principle. We would just have to sort of figure out what parts of this make sense for Mater Della Rosa to participate in, because you know, obviously our key thing is that we have to try and maintain the solitude and the silence of being a retreat center, because once we become the center of a noise-making activity, then, you know, the retreat center's function is less meaningful. And of course we have been, sorry, go ahead.
I'd like to know how many units you have now for your staff.
We have right now we have about 5 units for staff, and we've got 3 of those occupied currently. And then if you add the ordained to that, that's add another 5 to that, so that will be 10, because we have 4 priests and 1 monk, 1 brother living on site. So they live in a separate community, so that the community itself has to be physically separate from everyone else. That's just sort of part of the deal of canon law here. So that's basically where we are right now. And during COVID, we have repurposed our activities as well. Most of you are aware that we've repurposed our food kitchen to support a lot of needy and homeless groups in the various areas, and we've been doing fundraising to deal with that as well. So so we are trying to outreach to this community, even if we can't provide accommodation. And, you know, another thing, I apologize for taking so much time here, but one of the things that is important, because we have a lot of teens coming through here, it's critical that everyone on the property has been trained appropriately, vetted appropriately. You know, we have a very significant set of protocols that the Catholic Church in particular has to go through to make sure that everyone who is on site is a certified and safe individual. So we have a lot of security controls that maybe some other environments may have, particularly when we have young people visiting. But the safety of visitors is a critical issue for us as well. So I just throw a few of those things out just to illustrate some of the differences between us and a traditional congregation in a church, because we're more hosting the congregations that are coming from many places on a weekly basis.
If I could just offer one sort of observation to that, I think from a zoning tool standpoint, it would be relatively straightforward to include something like Mater Della Rosa in the options for providing housing, but then it would be critical for the organization itself to figure out how to design the project so that it met the requirements of maintaining the retreat space and proper separation of uses and things like that. So I think from a put on your government hat standpoint, it might not be that complex of an issue to be included, but it may be a much more complex congregation or organization driven process to actually implement something under allowable rules.
It would definitely be interesting, Tricia, to understand the rules associated with that, because we are in fact doing some affordable housing. We're just doing it on a small scale at the moment for the people that are actually working here. But I see that has to increase, because there's no way that we can that people can afford to live close enough to even be able to commute on public transportation. It's a big problem.
So I noticed with Andre White on the call, he may be of help too in thinking through private investment, because with the constraints that you have and the needs you have to look specifically at staffing, with public subsidies, you can't designate it for that. You have to, you know, that's why a number of churches want to set aside some units that would not be part of the publicly subsidized units to assure that some of their older seniors and so forth can stay on their property. And so I know Andres worked closely with some private investment that would, it's like a workaround, you know, and being able to supply some of those affordable units. But I don't know if he can hear me, if he's actually in earshot. Andre, are you on? And could you speak to that at all? Yeah, it looks like he probably had to step away. He's got that awesome picture. His daughter actually did that
I'm
for
here.
school.
All right, I'm here.
You are there? Yeah. Okay. Could you just speak to that a little bit? I don't know if you heard the question, but.
I mean, it's sort of specific to the site in the project, but for sure you can finance it privately. But I would need more details.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, what you said is correct, that if you don't use public dollars, you can finance, you know, the construction of affordable housing and sort of gear it towards, you know, staff or specific populations. Whereas when public subsidies are involved, it's a fair housing issue, and usually a lottery has to be used to determine sort of the initial occupants of that housing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the challenges is for us is that, you know, we're sort of operating under the same rules that a school would from a security perspective. So we, you know, so it would, you know, I mean, I'm certainly open to listening to what the options are here, because I would certainly like to try and find a way of being able to provide the affordable housing without the massive capital costs associated with it, because we are a not-for-profit organization. But we also have to, you know, ensure the safety and security of everyone who's here, particularly the teens, who make up a large part of our, you know, of the community that we service.
And it may need to be a separate ingress or egress to create that. But Michael, I know that you, on our survey that we did, somehow you got on our list of a Pasadena church and indicated that you were interested in this possibility. What are you guys thinking for your site? Did you hear that, Michael? Yeah.
Oh, you're talking about me. I don't know how I got onto a Pasadena.
I don't either, but
survey.
somehow you indicated there was some level of interest in this. So if you could share what you're thinking.
Sure. Our campus is pretty well utilized because we host a school. So our parking space is actually, you know, the church was established before there were automobiles. And so we are grandfathered in terms of zoning stuff with regard to we actually only have 24 parking spaces on our property, and that's really to facilitate the school's CUP as well. But there is actually, just to the east of our campus, there is a fairly good size parcel of land that about 2 years ago came onto the market. And it's a very extremely low density R3 existing property. And we started to explore the possibility of actually trying to acquire that for the purpose of then turning around and developing it for affordable housing. And so this makes it actually more attractive in one sense, because I think that if it goes to market rate, the number of units that would be available to be built on it would be less than if we were to do the development. And so I started talking with the Episcopal Community Services or community housing folks. Those are the folks who are the money behind both of those projects you highlighted in Placentia as well as Buena Park. And so you know, that they, I mean, we're sort of on the back burner for them because they've got some really viable places. The Episcopal Church's strategy in the 1940s, 50s was always to try and buy 5 acres. And so in many suburban areas that are now fairly higher density, we have these large parcels with lots of parking that and not a substantial space. So so their properties are certainly more conducive to that kind of a development. Our property is well, not so much since we're embedded in a relatively historic neighborhood as well. But you know, I'd certainly be interested in talking with the city about the possibility of that parcel just east of us that is contiguous, because it is one of the few R3 zone areas in town with existing rental units on it, but they're very low density. Whereas if we could develop something with more than, say, 20 to 30 units per acre, that would certainly make it a viable opportunity. But with the existing 16 units per acre, I'm not certain it would be actually a viable development.
I have an example and one question I'd like to share. Downtown LA, there's a Universalist church that bought a property so they could add additional parking. And then they realized through conversations with other churches how the 2 dilapidated apartment buildings they purchased, they said, you can't do that. We need the housing, you know, and they said you could build affordable housing and that a developer would provide the parking you need. So that's what they did. They partnered with Mercy Housing, which is a fabulous affordable housing developer. And they produced 97 units for special needs. And underneath they provided all the parking the church needed. So it was an amazing marriage, you know, between the 2 organizations. They were able to also get a child care center and a number of things the church is now involved in. But that's obviously an inappropriate size development for Sierra Madre. But my question is this, I guess one more example, here in Pasadena, typically the way affordable housing is built is the city buys the property and then they lease it back to the developer for maybe $1 a year. And so being able to have the partnership with the city to help some of that is huge, you know, if there's money set aside for that. But in terms of this site, is it in that zoning area, Karen, that you said has to go to a vote before it could have an increased density?
No.
It's outside of Measure B.
It's outside.
It's not within that.
Yeah, it's outside.
It is within that? No.
It's outside.
Oh, good.
And
That
did the property, you said it was up for sale 2 years ago, did it sell?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
So, and the asking price was pretty steep, but I suspect one of the reasons it may not have sold was because of the ability to build new housing on it was going to be constrained by the number of units per acre that it would be able to accommodate. Whereas if we were to do an overlay with, you know, if we were able to do a church overlay, that would be an interesting possibility. I don't know. Because of that fine line of, you know, the number of units per acre being a determinant about the viability of doing that.
Do you know approximately how many units are there?
I think there are about 7 units on the property right now.
Okay.
Which
we'll definitely take a look at it, because the other thing, I don't think we could put it in a church overlay if it's not owned by the church.
That's,
But
that-
we could
that's
put it as an affordable housing overlay.
right. But
and-
we
And
were
the church
actually,
could have the other overlay.
we were looking at actually trying to buy it, and because it's contiguous with our property, we could probably get it into the institutional zone as opposed to the R3 zone that it is right now.
Mm-hmm.
And then then we could work cooperatively. But we would probably, I think the way we would have to do is we would buy the property so that it would be church-owned property, and then we would then turn it around as they often do with working cooperatively with the developer. And we would probably use the Episcopal community housing stuff.
Do you have the capacity to purchase that property?
Well, it'd be a real stretch now in COVID.
It might be willing to negotiate because of the.
I think we'd have to leverage some of our existing assets to be able to do it. So, I mean, it would take some real creativity that, frankly, my brain is not up to at the moment. Even just getting a new roof on the church, the existing church roof property is sucking the life out of me.
Well,
I mean,
do you have a policy where you have to do replacement units for those 7 in the city of Sierra Madre?
oh, I'm sure that if the property sold, that any new development would have to be. I mean, that if the property
Have to
sold
be
to somebody
replaced.
else, yeah, it would.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, well, and there's not a local policy, but there's a state policy. So if any of those units were deed restricted, which they're probably not, but if any of them had rents that were affordable by nature of the market, or if any of them were occupied by lower income tenants over the last 4 years, then they have to be replaced as affordable units, deed restricted. Yeah, so
So-
we'll take a look at that.
I do apologize. I have to head to another meeting. So obviously I don't want to be the reason this wraps up if there's still conversations to happen, but I did want to thank everybody for inviting us. Vincent, you get to spend time, I'm sure, with my good friend Bob Spears, which makes me jealous.
I do.
But I do thank everybody, and if I can be a resource to anybody, I'm certainly happy to help and answer any other questions that might come up. So thank you, and I will sign off and have a lovely day.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Thank you.
I too am going to have to. I'm up against the hegemony of the East Coast, and I have a meeting that they always set Zoom meetings for their time, and not realizing that it's worse when they set an early morning meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm suffering from the same malady as well, Michael. I have another meeting that's set by an East Coast group starting in a couple of minutes time. So
they hate being called hegemonous, but they are.
I was invited a few weeks ago to speak at a conference in Florida, and I had to be ready for that at 5 in the morning because of the time change. So, you know, I said, if you want me back, you make it an afternoon meeting, please, you know. But it was a joy being with you all. And I also want to extend what Tricia shared, that our team is ready and willing to support any church interested in just exploring ways to be creative and make this happen. We have some pretty brilliant folks on our team, and there's some pretty brilliant folks in Sierra Madre too, to be creative. I think when it's really a lot to do with prayer and a willingness, and when there's a desire to make this happen, which I hear on the part of Michael, God just kind of opens way, and creativity and unbelievable ideas start emerging that I think we hadn't have considered. So it's truly spiritual activity that we're doing. I believe city planning is spiritual activity. I don't know where you're at with your faith, Vincent, but I think that there's really a lot to be said. I think you're doing God's work. Anyone that's doing city planning is doing God's work. And so thank you all for inviting us. And please take advantage of our professionals in the effort.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
You're
Thank you. Thank you
Bye-bye.
all.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sharon, do you have any questions for us?
Well, do you want to stay on the call? You and I and Claire?
I'm sorry, were you talking to me?
I was.
Yeah. Well, I just had one small question as a newbie. One of the options you had mentioned, Jill, was safe parking. And I wondered if that's something that's an option in Sierra Madre, because that with the church's involvement in Family Promise, I would think that might be a first step that they'd be open to.
It's a good question. And we do have some churches wanting to do safe parking and also look at permanent solutions and building affordable housing. It takes several years to do the
Right.
preliminary, all of the effort to actually get something built. And so, so it does, the two can very much coexist together. But there is an urgent need for safe parking. We have so many homeless folks now that are living in their cars. And by offering a site, especially that's not in Pasadena, it's very significant. Our city leaders often say, what are adjacent cities doing? And we don't see safe parking as a shelter. It's just using the parking place for what it's supposed to be. It's a parking place. Let somebody stay there at night who needs a parking place. But some view it as a shelter and another shelter, and they're saying, we don't need that in our city, but we need adjacent cities to take up their opportunity and to bless the community by hosting something like this. So we'd love to have a conversation with you. We have a church land committee. We have a safe parking committee. We'd love to invite you to explore what the possibilities are. But we really, now that we have the city planners here on the phone, we'd like to know what your policies say about that. We have found in looking at all of the details and the codes around what churches can and can't do, we don't see that it's not allowed. But we also don't see it's listed as a permitted use because it's a use that has not necessarily been considered before. So it's not listed as a permitted use.
Yeah, it wouldn't be listed as a permitted use. We do have the manufacturing zone, which allows for transitional and supportive housing opportunities there, and shelters. But this would be a different concept. I have not considered this before, and we would have to see what the willingness would be of our city council.
It would have to go to city council.
I think we would want to inform city council and get their feedback before making a decision.
And so the decision would be what? To add it as a permitted use on the conditional use for churches?
Yes.
Okay.
As part of the church lands and as institutional. Right.
Do you think there would be openness right now to the city on this, or would it be
I think we would get
a lot of organizing among churches too?
I think you would definitely need to have some outreach efforts on behalf of the church. I would probably, like many people in the community, would have some hesitation with the safe parking concept. I think some people are going to envision people coming in RVs and then they stay there throughout, the entire throughout the day and evening. I don't know, the city could impose some restrictions on that they would have to move out, but provide parking only for overnight parking. And so as I said, I haven't heard this concept before. Is this an operation or allowed in other areas that you've come across?
Santa Barbara has, I'm sure you're familiar with it, Jill, has a very robust safe parking program. Individuals need to register. Then they have service providers that visit them and try to connect them with services. but they've been doing it for quite some time.
Yeah, it's a stellar program. They've got 22 sites, many of them churches, and in some sites it's only 3 or 4 cars. Others it's larger, but they have people who go throughout the night to security, and there's actually been no incidences. It's been really safe. I don't think in that case, they do allow in certain sites to have RVs. We're looking at a church in Pasadena, and we do not want RVs. We only want cars. It's going to start probably as a pilot program, very small, with probably 5 cars, and that's it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so, so I don't think there's going to be any impact on the community at all. You know, churches are already kind of doing this. They're already allowing people to park, but it's informal. It's just a handshake, you know. But we feel like a formalized program is much better because it makes sure that everybody is checked out. It's safe, that everyone's vetted. That's part of it. Everyone agrees to be on a path to getting permanently housed. So there's case management and there's relationship. We feel like having a formalized program, then the police, everybody knows about it, you know, neighbors know about it. Right. And so it's all good, you know, and then with the church partnering with the organization Foothill Unity, which is based in Monrovia, they're the ones that will be hosting this and working with all the churches. And so it's a very professional, very respected and known organization. So there's a lot of safety net. There's a lot of planning. We've been meeting for 1.5 years planning this. And so it's a great model. It really is just a great way that a church can carry out their mission to bless the community by allowing those people that normally wouldn't be connected with case management, that normally wouldn't be, you know, they might be sleeping on the street, getting tickets, and this is finally a place where they can relax and they can truly sleep, but all of them being part of getting housed permanently.
I can definitely see that benefit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know if Huntington Beach implemented a safe parking program?
I have no idea. That would be great if they did.
They were talking about it some time ago, and I just haven't followed up.
That's surprising. I thought Huntington Beach was
Well,
pretty.
They're very conservative, but they do, you know, they do help with the homeless because it's a beach community and they are quite homeless there. Yeah.
Well, I hope that the people of Sierra Madre, and especially the churches, if they come together to support the United Methodist Church, if this is a path they feel God's calling them to do, that there will be some organizing, you know, to go to the city council, have great talking points and help people see the incredible value that it would for just a few, you know. I tell you, it's just a blessing to see the United Methodist Church host homeless families within their congregation. That's when I can go to the city council now in Pasadena and say that Alhambra, South Pasadena, Sierra Madre are all hosting within the 4 walls of their church homeless families. Our city's like, wow, it's not just Pasadena, you know, it's now adjacent cities doing something, you know. So, but you know, with COVID, everything's changed. You can't do it the same, but you certainly can park in your car. It's really safe, you know. You lock the door, you know, and it's but it's I thank you for raising the question. If there's something you want to continue to explore, please reach out, Sharon. Let me give you my email.
Thank you, Jill.
To join our safe parking committee.
Yeah.
To share your thinking and your congregation on that. So, how many other churches do you think there might be in Sierra Madre that might be interested in exploring this?
We have 2 others that we invited and called and emailed without response, which is Church of Christ, which is here within what we talked about as a Measure V, would require possibly a vote of residents, and also St. Rita, which is a fairly large campus.
Well, Vincent, if you and Karen, if you want us to come back for an additional presentation with those churches at a time that's convenient for them, we would be happy to make ourselves available.
And you said you had contacted all the churches in Pasadena to explore their interest, which is kind of what we did for as part of this meeting. But I'm wondering now if we want to follow up and kind of explain the process in a little bit more detail to see if there's potential interest. Because, as you were saying, it's not that you're committing to building the housing in any, short-term time horizon, but it's that, showing support of the concept, which is important.
Yeah. Yeah, that gets confusing for some of our churches. They say,
Yeah.
we don't want to build, I go, no,
Right.
you don't have to, you just need to support the concept that churches would be rezoned to allow this use and make it possible for other churches that want to do this,
Now,
So,
you mentioned the advisory services. Is that something the city could use to help them with their overlay, or is that more advisory services directly with the churches?
it's a good question, Karen. Thanks for asking that. We hadn't really considered, although Phil Burns, who is a professional planner who leads our, he has done housing elements and all kinds of work with other, actually, I think I'm wrong. I don't think he's done a housing element yet, but he's done all kinds of plans for cities, general plans. And so, I know he certainly is very, very savvy and be able to help city think through very carefully what it would take to get an overlay zone passed. And not the organizing part, but the actual codes.
Yeah.
I mean, we spent, I wish you could be a part of our meetings, all of you, when we were going through all these city codes and crafting what we felt would be appropriate for our city, which would be totally different for Sierra Madre.
Yeah.
But
it seems like Trisha's experience would be valuable since she was on the design review committee in Pasadena and planning commission, that she would understand the nuances.
Yeah, I think, but she has a full-time job. She's very busy. This is actually what Phil does, and he would be able to draw upon Trisha's knowledge.
Yeah.
So Phil would be able to contract out with your city and do that kind of service. Our team is primarily working with churches and helping them clarify what their vision is and what they would like to see happen, and then help them go through that path so they can have a viable plan going forth before they talk to a developer. Too often developers are coming in and saying, we want to do this, and they don't know, and they might end up with a deal that isn't win-win for them. They end up not getting a good deal out of it. And so we're very committed to the church's vision, but I know that we're really savvy when it comes to what an overlay zone would look like. So I'm sure we'd be willing to offer those services, but I can't speak for our committee. I have to go back to them and ask.
Sure.
But the funding that we received, the $100,000, then another $20,000, is specifically to work with churches, not so much with cities to do their overlay zones. So that's why I'm suggesting Bill Burns, who has studied this incredibly well, would be a great resource for you guys if you have some funding to pay him for that service, but the service directly with the churches is free because of our funding source.
Sure.
We were able to offer that, and believe me, that's a huge gift.
I heard that.
That's a huge gift.
Excellent.
That would normally cost the church hundreds of thousands of dollars, and we're doing it for free. And so, but we're there for the church, to help the church really be able to be equipped to do what they are being called to do. And some real creativity has to happen on every church. It's totally unique. We now, yeah. So, but we'd love to partner with Sierra Madre and imagine what could be done, what's appropriate and sensitive to the community. And just so you know, if you're going to partner with subsidies and tax credits is the largest funding source for building affordable housing, and they typically don't kick in unless the project is at least 40 units or larger. So, you know, funding sources are tricky to make it work financially. Zoning has everything to do with having enough zoning. There are density bonuses that could get you up to a little higher rate. But you really, we found that 32 units per acre is really the minimum to make the numbers work for subsidized affordable housing.
Okay.
Unless you're going to do smaller units, smaller developments, you might partner with HHP, Heritage Housing Partners. You might,
which they have a Heritage Housing Partner project in Sierra Madre.
Or partner with Habitat. They do multifamily now. They do single family. They do, you know, some creative things with ADUs, you know, behind homes. So there, you know, whatever's appropriate for your community. But to meet those 200 units, was it 204?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, churches could be definitely a part of that.
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Well, we'll definitely, we have a community meeting December 1st. So this will be part of that discussion as well.
Well, it's, you guys should be really happy that you have only 204 units. You know what we have?
I know, what, 9,000 or something, right?
We have to come up with 9,000 units. So that's part of the reason our city's, I think, feeling like this is a great opportunity. Is we showed in the PowerPoint, you know, 117 potential units just on the 17 churches right now that have shown interest.
Yeah.
So, you know, that's looking really good, but it's still not going to be an easy win. I mean, we right now have on our city council people that are not necessarily supporting this after the election. So pray for us. So, yeah. Okay. But anyway,
thank you so much,
you guys. Yeah, I hope, Vincent, you don't mind my kind of talking faith language. I don't know where you're coming from, and same with you, Claire, but so I hope that was not offensive. But I really appreciate that you guys have invited us. It's a joy to get to see you.
Thank you very much. Very informative.
Yeah.
Okay. God bless you all.
Okay.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me.
Thank you, Sharon. I hope we get